The name of this course that is currently in development is Feeding Complexity. And it's a structured learning journey that occurs over 6 months. And we're hoping to launch in the fall of this year. So we'll start with a bit of a grounding and framing activity. Um, I'm inviting you all to think about everything you know about food systems, all the way from cultivation to human consumption. And if you'd like to think about when you first realized food systems were complex, how you learned about food systems, who did you learn it from? What was the context for that learning? Was it like in school or informal education? And how did you feel after learning it? Is that a question that you'd like time to think about, or would people like to share now?
I can respond. I can
Okay.
respond. I didn't feel like it was just easy for I. It was a great question. I grew up in a grocery store, so my parents owned a grocery store. So very early, I was thinking about food systems and like pulling the boxes off of trucks and putting them into produce aisles and stuff. Um, The complexity, though, I think only really occurred to me in the last couple of years living in a farming area and doing a lot of gleaning practices of like getting the stuff that was still good after the harvest to give away. And I think that's when I just realized how much this is an issue of distribution, not an issue of production. And um, how I felt learning that is like a complicated feeling of like optimism and frustration. Like we can do it, but why aren't we?
Thank you.
Ah, I was in a backpack and it was the last day, and I met a girl who had celiac disease, and I got offended. How can someone be sick by eating the food I was grown up all my life eating? I I was sitting with my friend's father, and I decided to step into farming, and took me more than an year to understand the complexity of it all. But it was through a book or then through an elder sharing stories, weaving timelines together. How did I feel after about it, about learning it? I felt like I don't know anything by knowing this. I need to give it my life. I just give it my life energies.
Thank you. Anyone else like to respond?
If I was going to distill it into a moment, it would be the Oxford Food Symposium a couple of years ago. And there's a chap, a presenter, who was talking about the library system developed by Melville Dewey and how it was, for him, almost impossible to categorize food into a single Dewey decimal classification. It was spread, so food is spread across absolutely everything. And I was thinking, I'm interested in pragmatism and food education, and I was thinking if John Dewey was involved um, in that process, then maybe there would have been a different outcome of how we look at food, how we categorize knowledge of food. Because it's imminent. It has these mycelial connections to absolutely everything, and that's what John Dewey understood as an educator.
That's really,
Thank you.
really
Okay.
interesting, Richard. I'll pop in for just a minute because I was primarily a food systems educator for a little over a decade, but came to food systems education from food and agriculture law and food and agriculture legal education, law and policy work, and got into food systems work and food systems education because I was so frustrated that so much of the law and policy discussion was so narrow and was not systems aware, right? And I could just like couldn't ignore the fact and the feeling that like, oh, food touches everything. And also it's a really great way to get people interested because we're all experts in some aspects of it, right? Like we all have experience, we all have familiarity. And for a long time I like was kind of glib about it. We'd be recruiting students and I was kind of office mates with the guy who ran the sustainable energy program and I'd be like, "Yeah, you have to get people excited about turning the lights on and off or whatnot." Like I got dessert on my side. And so there was this immediacy, this intimacy, this everythingness of it that I think lended itself, if approached honestly and openly and with integrity, to allowing us to access and see complexity so quickly.
Mm.
However, a lot of what passes for food systems education, a lot of what happens that gets classified as food systems change work, often narrows and reduces that down in
Yeah.
ways that actually really misses and eliminates so much of what is possible here. And it, for me, became a real big challenge to try to figure out how to do that kind of education in contexts that are largely set up for, training people to be able to go get a job working at some multinational corporation or administering a government program about food access or whatnot. And so, I think like I always understood that it was complex and I kept getting more and more excited about the complexity side of it. But finding that really in tension with a lot of how people have an opportunity to interface with food and food systems professionally.
Mhm.
Thank you. I appreciate you bringing up complexity, the concept of it, because that's central to the course that we're developing. And one thing I noticed about the responses was that there are many different entry points to approaching food systems. And that's part of the reason why food systems education is tricky to get right, because it is so complex and there's so many entry points. But that's also what makes it very important. I see a hand. Is that
Dania, you can.
Daniel?
Yes, hello, I am Daniel.
Hi.
Okay, nice questions.
Mhm.
I think that it is easy when we address food systems, starting with water, because we cannot live without it.
Mhm.
And we eat every day. You have the privilege of doing so. In Ecuador, we have this paradigm of good living in harmony with nature. We call it buen vivir or summa causa. It is an indigenous based concept. And one of the core aspects is the rights of nature as well as food sovereignty. So, how we can actually be much more connected in how we can have this resilience and be able to produce our own food. Now, in terms of the complexity, we can address it like going to our families and eat these traditional foods with so much variety of elements of ingredients, and learning the complexities to a higher level for me was dealing with climate change and agrobiodiversity. Right now in our country, we have the legal frameworks and also the policy frameworks. And now the next step is to work with youth for national policy for youth. And the context for learning for me is more about regenerative processes as well as value change, just value change for the agricultural sectors, and is like this need to bring together both the local requirements for a healthy and nutrition life, conserving nature, as well as how we can create income and employment for young people because they are leaving the countryside looking for opportunities in other contexts. So the learning keeps going on, and I think that it is also important to mention that our chocolate supply chain is very important. And we have students ranging from 12 years old till 15 years old that can be much more attentive to this kind of education, as well as introducing digital education that can support their parents and elders to learn because they are busy working and the students are more open to this. So I'm looking forward to this kind of learning from very young people that can scale up.
Thank you for that contribution. I'd like to ask another question, actually, having to do with this, and it hopefully will prepare us for framing food systems education for when I share the course content itself. If we could think just briefly, quickly, of one food we ate in the last 2 days, and as best as we could, try to trace that food backwards from consumption to cultivation from the earth. I'd like us to think through these questions here. Who cooked it? Who brought it to us, the consumer? Where did those ingredients come from? What kinds of policies support the cultivation of those ingredients? We can think about labor, the people who touched that food before it got to us. And just as an exercise briefly, I'm wondering if we can think about where those relationships become more obscured and less obvious. At what point is it more difficult for us to answer this question? So tracing a food backwards. Oops.
I come from the UK, and we probably started this. So in terms of listening, answering your first question, so I just had a family meal with ham. I have no idea where that animal was raised. It was just had it with my folks, my family. I had no idea where that animal was raised, and we started this distribution, the globalization of how we source our food. So it's probably from somewhere like Denmark, but it could be somewhere completely different. So yeah, there's a fundamental disconnect between the tracing of what lands at the table and people's perceptions. And I'm thinking, I'm interested obviously in food, and I haven't I've kind of given up on that idea of, oh, we should be doing community supported agriculture. We should have pigs down the road that, and we should be just doing nose to tail eating, and I've kind of just given up on it because it's just so it's so endemic. It's so endemic in the industrialization of our food system that you kind of just can't do anything about it.
Well, thank you for that response. And it actually leads to the conclusion I was hoping to come to pretty directly. I think what you were saying is that this really intimate connection we have to the earth which is food. We ingest food, other living beings, former living beings, in order to sustain our own life. It's a very intimate relationship. But the systems that bring the food to the consumers, generally speaking, especially in an industrial food system, are obscure and they seem really, really vast because they are, and really hard to understand. And so we participate in these relationships that stretch across the whole earth, people, institutions, infrastructure, but we don't always understand those relationships. And we rely on these systems to feed us, but we can't control it, as you just said. And on top of all of that, conventional education doesn't really prepare us to reckon with all of that complexity and to move through it, to navigate that complexity. So that's the context that we're dealing with when we're trying to develop food systems education that actually serves us in the moment in order to live in better relationship with the earth, as was also previously stated. So that's the framing that we're thinking of when we're coming up with this course, which we've called Feeding Complexity. So for this description, I'm going to push right through. I'll be talking for quite a bit, but if anyone has questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. First, I'll talk about the context, which we've already started talking about. I'll talk about the shift that we think this course is trying to make, or the pedagogical focus of the course, and then a bit about the course content. So the context, conventional food systems education is designed for a specific kind of learning. It teaches about food without really exploring ecological relationship with the earth. It analyzes systems without examining the motivations and the relationships within those same systems. And it might explain or touch on complex systems, but it doesn't really prepare us with skills to navigate that complexity. So it tends to be disembodied, where learners can kind of study it separate from the self and not really see yourself in that system, and it lacks ecological context. And it doesn't really question the underlying assumptions that are embedded in our relationship to the earth through food. And it also tends to focus on control over participation in ecological relationships. So basically, overall, it mirrors the same food system that it's meant to reproduce. That is one that's linear, one that's transactional, and by that I mean between people and also between people and the earth. And the emphasis is on control generally. So that's the context. The shift we're hoping to make is to address some of that context. Feeding Complexity, the course, is trying to shift away from that linear transactional way of learning and towards a more emergent relational kind of learning. And it's based around these three lenses that shape how food systems behave and how they change in order to explore how we might move toward an ag-relational food system. So we're trying to reflect the food system that we want to exist in the very design of the course. And those three lenses are grounding in ecological processes, dynamics, and limits. So instead of ignoring the ecological fact of how the earth works, we want to accept the fact and integrate the fact that human food systems exist within these ecological processes. They're not separate from them, they're part of it. And that means reckoning with all of the tensions that exist within ecological systems. There's always a push and pull going on. The second lens is examination of human motivations and relationships within these systems. So our food system is a reflection of the beliefs, the values, the power structures, and the technological choices that we make when designing a food system. So if we're to understand a food system holistically, that requires an honest examination of the motivations within that system. Otherwise, we're not really getting to the root of it. And the third lens is an integration of the behavior and life cycle of complex adaptive systems. Ecosystems are complex adaptive systems, as are food systems. And so it makes sense to use those same understandings that we have of complex adaptive systems when we're thinking about the food system and teaching about it. So the course itself It's a structured learning journey that synthesizes all of these things: ecological reality, human motivations and social structures, and the complexity that's inherent in all of these systems, synthesizing those three together to come up with a coherent relational approach to food systems and how they change over time. I'll also say that it's not necessarily new scientific theory, but the thing about it is the synthesis, the arrangement of all of this content, the juxtaposition. That's the thing that the course is really about. So we're referring to already established fields of study and disciplines. So really quickly, the 6 units are the following. So we start with living systems. That's this baseline understanding of living systems and how they work, the tensions that exist within them, and the Earth's ability to produce life. That's something that has to be part of the conversation because our food system is part of those ecological processes. We're animals that eat just like all other living beings. The second unit is an introduction to two frameworks, systems theory and complexity theory, and explores a definition of food systems that's informed by those two theories. And the authors that it's mostly based on are Donella Meadows and Nora Bateson. So we look at those two frameworks for how they can inform our understanding of food systems. The third unit is the dark one when we talk about the industrial food system. It's an overview of food systems history, really big chunks of time. But the thing that stays consistent through the timeline that we're looking at is thinking about the consequences, both the social and ecological consequences of the relationships in the food system at different points in time. So those relationships change over time, and as those relationships change, the consequences for the earth and for humans also change. So that's the cause and effect that we're looking at through the history of the food system. The fourth unit talks about what a paradigm even is. We look at three sections or kind of categories within the paradigm to interrogate the human motivations that a food system is based on. So that's like myths and culture and expectation. How should the world work? How should it be? How do we know what we know? What's a human's place in the world? All of that is within that category. We also talk about power structures and institutions. Who has decision-making power within an industrial food system, and how do they wield that power? And then we talk about more practical, tangible parts of the paradigm. That's infrastructure and mechanisms and technology. How do those shape how we interact with the physical world? And what do they allow us to do? So the fifth unit is when we revisit complexity and systems theory in order to think about how those two frameworks can best inform how we move through food systems change. They have unique interventions or responses that are required of us. So we're exploring what those two frameworks might say about what we should do or could do in the moment. And then the final unit is Impossible Futures, and it argues for imagination as a fundamental condition for relational food systems to emerge. Like it's not really happening without our ability to imagine what it could be. And that's the final unit. So that was a lot of information. I appreciate you listening to all of that. But the objective overall is to prepare us to navigate the complexity of co-creating that food system together, which is I think of it as our responsibility in this moment. Does anyone have any questions before the kind of heart of our conversation? That's the next thing we're going to do. Okay, feel free to put anything in the chat if you'd like as I introduce our discussion
So,
question. Oh,
just going one step backwards,
hmm.
who did you have in mind when you started designing this,
Sure.
entity?
Yeah. Who did I have in mind? Um, so my background as a high school educator, I was thinking high schoolers. But the learning community that this course is being designed for is a very wide-ranging group of people who have all sorts of motivations for wanting to learn about this kind of thing. And so when I'm thinking about this pedagogically and content-wise, I'm imagining the people I know in life, like my mom and my friends who can wrap their minds around like big, complex ideas, but maybe haven't thought about this specific combination of topics. Um, and yeah, I think this kind of information should be available to as wide a group as possible. Um, and hopefully something that can be, I think someone earlier mentioned scaling up. If it works for maybe some group of people, there can be a way of scaling it or adjusting it for different groups across the world, different ages, different education levels, etc. Yeah, so that's where it exists now.
And Kemi, maybe one
Mhm.
thing I'll add to that, in addition to what I put in the chat about just sort of the genesis of this collaboration and why this course is sort of starting to take shape now. I co-authored this book at the end of sort of my formal food systems teaching, which was mostly at the undergrad, graduate, and legal level. Um, and then Kemi took the book and taught it in the context of a high school semester program. And for me, that was one of the most exciting possible uses someone could have made of this text because it meant that the high school juniors who she was working with didn't get food systems first in this sort of transactional extractive paradigm. Their first exposure was through a lens of deep relationality and systems thinking with complexity and entanglement and interdependence all there. And so getting to come in to the course Kemi was teaching, and engage with her high school students at a level that many of my grad students were still struggling with because they were taking my courses in the context of professional graduate study that was designed to prepare them for, the particular kinds of jobs that they might be able to get was really enlivening. It was really wonderful to be able to like say, "Oh my gosh, this group of people is getting this so much earlier. Where can they take it?" And that was the moment at which I was like, I actually don't want to design the course. I want the course to be designed by someone who has come to this earlier in their career, who can then build on it, but to put it out into a context where perhaps people who are working within food systems, right, their work touches food systems or not, but need to understand more, um, like would have the opportunity to benefit from this lens at a topic that's kind of accessible, um, like kind of both of those groups in an intergenerational, kind of like late adolescence through adult context, I think is what we're mostly developing for, but that's still a really broad audience,
Yeah.
not particularly tight.
Definitely. And I'll add that I came to food systems education explicitly in graduate school. And part of what motivated me to teach food systems to high schoolers was the fact that I couldn't believe it took me all the way until grad school to think about these kinds of things. And so I was eager to share it with as wide a range an audience as possible, because I think it's everyone's right to know about this kind of thing. Okay, so the heart of our conversation. Um, yep.
Danny's
Nicole.
hand is up again.
Oh,
So
yes, please.
Thank you. My question was about how are you connecting this with media?
Mm,
Because I am also a teacher with the BioSchools program with Gaia Education. And under sustainable consumption, I realized the importance of linking this to the changes in our cultural behaviors. For instance, under the free trade agreement between Mexico and the US,
mhm.
the changes in the consumption behavior as well as diabetes just raised so much. So I wonder how you are dealing with this
Of the role of media in those
role of
changes.
media and social
Yeah,
media too, because
yeah,
now
yeah,
they are
definitely.
bombing with this information. Huh?
Right. I would say currently, we're doing iterative drafts of this course right now, and I would say currently that probably lives within the unit of the present paradigm, because I think media is, a form of information flow, which is part of the paradigm of how we know what we know, why we think what we think is part of that part of our paradigm. So we're hoping to think about social media and also reasons for food trends and things that also interact with trade agreements and food policies and all of that. Yes, very complex. Is that another question?
Yes.
No,
So,
that's
uh,
good.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Irene, please go. I will go after you.
Sorry, to me, or
You can
I was
go.
going to say, someone else is going to say something. I was just going to say that the stalwarts, the people who are leading, who have paved the path for a different future, who have done the systemic education, who have done the analysis, but haven't been able to transform the systems. They understand the problem, they understand the dynamics, but are struggling or putting their life energies into changing. How do they come into this?
sorry, could you repeat your question? People who understand the dynamics but still aren't able to change things?
I have a person in India
Mm,
who is coming all the way across on all these levels, and he's designed a communication mechanism for getting it in real life action.
mhm.
And even after 30 years of work, he might have reached 100,000 people. And my country has deeply reached 100,000 people after 30 years. But he's a person, and the country's size is the international year of millets that happened a couple of years ago was because of this guy. One was one of the major reasons because of this guy. And even after that, the whole country is 100 million, 1 billion people. It's 100,000 to 1 billion. That is the scale, and even 100,000 is big. So I'm talking about the torchbearers, the stalwarts. How do they come into this?
Can I
Making it,
suggest? Yeah.
yeah, that's all.
Yeah, thank you. I think your question is related to the discussion question that I'm posing here. And so maybe you can tell me as we're discussing this if it is related. So I have two prompts for our discussion, which will take maybe the next 15 minutes or so. Um, One is from the learner perspective, and one is from the educator perspective. And I can get your input on which we're most feeling passionate about in the moment. So from the first perspective, um, the learner perspective, if we were designing food systems education to better prepare us for the disruption, ecological and social disruption that is happening currently, and help us prepare for a relational food system, what would learners need to know? What would they need to practice and embody in order to be prepared for this moment? And in there, we can consider structural awareness, that is, working understanding of how systems work and act on the self, inner conditions like our beliefs, our motivations, awareness of the self, and then relational skills, all of those skills that allow us to collaborate with each other and co-create with each other. That's the learner perspective. And then from the educator perspective, if we're designing this food system, again, prepared to meet these ecological limits and systemic disruption, how do we balance preparing learners for the realities of the day? That is the need for professional preparedness and other pressures that they might be feeling with relational transformation that we're hoping for. And so for that, we consider the practical infrastructure, like the food system, supply chains, all of that still needs to go on. ecological and systemic disruption, that's the limits that exist within the earth, instability, energy availability and production, all of that. And then the context of power. There's lots of tensions between operating within formal institutions, operating from imperial states, and the focus on professional readiness or operating outside of this. So I'm wondering which of these two we should pursue for the remainder of our time here. Nicole, do you have a suggestion?
I suspect different folks in the room may have different things to bring. And
Mhm.
so maybe we just let them both sit and see what is most alive for this group because we're all coming from such different backgrounds and perspectives.
Mhm. Yeah, anyone feeling strongly about either?
Yeah, I think, I mean, they cross-pollinate actually,
Yeah.
because even as an educator perspective, everyone is a learner
Mhm.
at that space. So, and even thinking about schools, even if you're an educator, you have also the administration, the kitchen, everyone needs to be involved. So, and the family and the community. And so we
Mhm.
can just see how it goes. But I think they cross-pollinate.
Okay. Cool. So how do you think we should structure this then?
Can I take us back to one of your points in the previous slide, which
Sure.
I think speaks to both of these
Hmm.
perspectives, which was Donella Meadows' idea of the leverage point.
Hmm.
I tried to play with this with the previous a previous discussion that we need to change the way that we look at our paradigms. So it's not a leverage point, it's leverage agency.
Hmm.
And I wasn't really afforded the space. I didn't really feel afforded the space to talk about this. If we look through the metaphor of food, so to be a leverage agent is to be yeast. You are yeast in your system,
Mm.
and if you don't, as all people, I hope all of us have made bread and needed bread and in our time, and we know that if you don't redistribute your yeast and redistribute and knock back, you have a fairly undistributed system of bread, and it either falls back or it all goes wrong. So for me, coming back to that, the John Dewey idea that we can think through food as a metaphor for an interconnectedness of everything. Coming back to what Sarah was talking about in the beginning of our the plenary session about metaphor as being a grounding for everything. Food is something that connects obviously all of us, and it's thinking in productive ways about the materiality of it, the essentiality of it, the care that goes into these acts. That's if I was going to trying to get that leverage point, I'm moving from the idea that it's a systemic thing to it's an agentic thing. It's something. It's how you relate in the world, how
Hmm.
you care in the world, in a deeply visceral way.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, in this unit 5, when we revisit complexity theory, as described and articulated by Nora Bateson. That's the kind of response I think her theory calls for, more of a visceral participation within the system, um, as opposed to the leverage points or the trying to find the points where you can change a system that way. And it's still in progress, but in that unit, we're thinking about how different situations call for different responses. And where some places leverage points make sense, generally, as in an industrial culture, we're really well practiced in finding leverage points, writing policies,
Yes.
building technologies, all of that. And we're
It's a,
less
it's a
practiced
paradox.
in,
That's the thing. You know,
yeah,
you've done it yourself. Unit one to
right.
six. It's a paradox. You
Mhm.
can't function without these structures.
Yeah. And so sometimes the leverage points make more sense, and sometimes focusing on those interrelations, all those little connections, and that visceral participation um, is actually the response that's maybe more appropriate. So that's what we explore there. And I'll put these questions back here in case anyone wants to reference. Yes, Dania?
I wonder how you deal with digital traceability and the use of AI
Mm.
in the
Oh,
food
that's a question.
systems. Yeah. How do you deal
Um,
with digital traceability and AI?
yeah,
Where did you frame it?
uh, do you mean within the course content or
Yes,
its use?
exactly.
Oh, within. Again, I think I would point to that same part of the unit when it comes to the present paradigm, because it's another concept. I don't even know what word to use, but phenomenon maybe that's part of information flow, how we share information, how we produce knowledge, what should be like, what is our purpose on Earth if we have access to this technology that changes our capacity to relate to each other. Yeah, that part is not fleshed out, but I'm curious what you hope maybe a course like this might say about this new technology.
I will take a couple of aspects. One is more technical because,
Hmm.
for instance, the European Union has a directive indicating that we should only export products that are not related with deforestation. So they're
Mm.
deforestation-free products.
Okay.
And for that, we need traceability. So it's very important that we have this digital traceability. So in every single stage, we're sure that we are not exploiting nature nor people. So
Hmm.
it's also related to free trade and other aspects which are really, really important, and also for organic production. On the
Hmm.
other hand, I was preparing for the question that you had at the beginning, a cake with banana, raw banana, and different ingredients. So I want to have a very nice recipe because I was using ingredients that are not commonly used. So I went to AI, gave the characteristics, so
Hmm.
the instructions as a prompt, and then I could adjust. So for me, it was like the perfect instruction by the end. And then the cake was delicious. I could share it with my family and friends, and they really appreciate it.
Hmm.
On the other hand, I know that some people are very reluctant to use this kind of technologies. So I would also like to have your perspective in terms of what are the boundaries
Yeah, right.
in the food systems.
Yeah, sure. I don't know that I have an answer to that necessarily, but I think this question that you have is related somewhere here, a tension that educators must address. And I think maybe what I'm pointing to is the fact that education should address tensions. Um, And so I don't really have an answer for your question necessarily. It's still in progress. And all of our knowledge about these things is evolving like by the minute. But I would hope that a course like this would offer students the opportunity to consider the tension of technology, the trade-offs, the pros and the cons, and the implications for how we relate to the earth and to each other based on that. So I hope it's not too much of a cop out to say that, but I think that's the
I think too, like for me, one of the
Thank
things
you.
that's interesting when it's attention, especially attention related to um, emergent or emerging or newly emerged
Mhm.
technologies, right? Like to also think about what the material basis of those technologies is and whether it seems prudent right now to go further into like deeply integrating those technologies into what what is an absolutely necessary thing we rely on, right? And this is some of that like present future, near future, like how much do we need to potentially support learners, support ourselves and each other in not getting so caught up in this is a thing we can use now and the way that we're trying to address different challenges now when perhaps to use the traceability, not necessarily just the AI, when perhaps actually what we're planning for is a lot less global trade because we need food systems that are much less energy intensive overall. So like holding the tensions, the multiple tensions inside of one of those questions feels really important to me in this as well. It's a really
Yeah.
good question for getting underneath all of that.
Mhm.
I had one th thought, Kemi, with your one essential practice that you're looking with that like
Mhm.
question you're asking. I feel
Yes.
like the question you asked us of like what's a food you ate in the last 2 hours and then tracing it feels like it gets at the heart of like all of these questions on some level of like what is the tracing of my use of AI? Like what are the
Mhm.
where is the cobalt coming from? It's the same concept of
Yep.
like what are we tracing? When you asked that, I was eating this trail mix that I like just have, and it's like, oh my God, that's overwhelming to try to trace. But to get high school, I also teach high schoolers. I feel like to get high schoolers to get into that practice would like shift. And I wanted to throw out here just really quickly one practice that I started doing is I learned that the Sioux people in their naming structure of foods will include within it like from the west or from far away
Mhm.
as the name of the food. And so I started trying to think that way instead of calling something like Thai basil. I tried to think of it not of its origin, but rather like its relation to me, like where is it coming from in relation to me?
Yeah.
And I thought that was that's changed a lot of my like different foods I get where, oh, it's from like south a half an hour. That changes my understanding of it versus like it's from the grocery store that buys things from the
Mhm.
plane that buys things from Iran,
Mhm.
The yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Attention is definitely a practice and a habit that I think will be part of this new this relational food system. Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on either of these or even the framing of them? We're interested in like all feedback or input.
I
Can I
just
give a
want to share one example
Mhm.
that, sorry, here in the Bay Area, Alice Walker started what we call the Farm to Table
Mhm.
initiative in many schools. So there is traceability from the farm to the table in the school, and they will also make the food. So I just wanted just to illustrate what people are doing also locally here.
Can I give a use case for this? If it's not too much, uh, it may take about 2 minutes to explain.
Yeah, please.
So I found a project which was done 20 years ago out of India that brings in grandmothers into knowledge holders of solar engineering called Solar Mamas. And tracing it, I have reached Sierra Leone to see how it pans out 20 years later, an intervention. There were a lot of systemic failures in it. And to understand and to get there, I made relationship with people from a country that I'd never thought about in my life. And then the numbers and statistics started coming in, and they are importing $100 million of rice from India. And all of Southeast Asia, you would imagine 200 million. Now, the country is exporting minerals and other things to get that foreign exchange. And the country is all aid dependent. So there is this helplessness that comes with being aided that is reinforced in that country. And now the whole case and the scenario is how can we work in that country that that country's food sovereignty comes together? And how do we deal with the situation in a way that, and it's just the seeds of it all.
Mhm.
I'm also working with the youth in the cities to get the right balance of the youth and the elder coming together. And it's all online right now, but I will go there and be with them in person and see what things can be done because there is $100 million industry there, $200 million industry of food in that country. Now, if it goes food sovereignty wise, that builds so much momentum inside the country to do it right. The consumption is already there.
Mhm.
And then how do you shift everything in that regards?
Yeah, I'd like to say something because it's come up a couple times in our time together that um, feeling like the weight of everything, or the weight of a really big problem, like what you just described, or just like the food system, capital F, capital S, and feeling like it all lands on one person. Something I'm hoping comes out of this course or a takeaway that students have is that that's actually not, how anything changes. When we describe complex adaptive systems, um, they're not centrally controlled by any one agent within the system. Um, it has a lot more to do with the relationships between all of those agents rather than the intention of any one person or any one institution. So,
Can I, yeah,
mhm,
can I counter that? It's
mhm,
I understand where you're coming from, but
yeah.
where I'm coming from, I'll explain you, is that if I start something, it should not stop midway
Mhm,
because the systemic fail like that will mess up the situation. If you have a strategy, if you leave it halfway,
mhm,
so how do you design it in a way that even if I die or the whole project dies or something ill happens, does the systemic design still take care of itself?
mm. Yeah, so you're like, how do systems persist? Yeah. Well, that's something I hope we study in this course too. Yes,
Well, systems
distributed.
are always changing
Mhm,
as a default, by default.
mhm. Yeah.
It's
Any last,
amazing.
oh, sorry.
It's amazing, Kemi. What a nice job that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, Nicole and I are really excited about it, and it's everything I think about. So,
Kemi, I
yeah.
don't know if you had a particular plan for closing, but as I was listening to some of the contributions, I was reminded of one of Nora's poems and combining. And
Mhm.
if we would like to just kind of close out with an example of the kind of way of holding complexity around food and ecology, I could read that for you.
Yeah,
If
sure.
you're ready.
I'll skip ahead to the last slide. I also had some nice words, but I'd love to hear the
Yes.
poem as well.
Don't
And
skip the previous.
yeah, well,
When
I'll
was the
thank
one before?
I'll thank everyone for your contributions and for your participation and just sharing a link to otherwise. And on the right are just some lyrics from a song I really love, which samples a poem by Nikki Giovanni. But Nicole, I'd love to hear the poem you had.
Ugh, you picked a Nikki Giovanni one, who's one of my favorites. This takes a moment to read, and if you have to pop off quickly, I understand. But it really felt to me as I just heard so many of the themes, I was like, ah, this is harvest. Be careful. A hasty harvest is an unfeeding. It is non-food. Harvests are patient histories and quiet roots that start tiny. While compost is necessary for the growing season, do not eat the compost. Wait. The eggshells and the onion skins bear little resemblance to the conversation at the table where the meal they fed feeds you. Wait. The industrial craving for instant food, ideas, plans distracts from entering ecological time. An apple seed in the ground is not an apple. It requires seasons, years, changes in light, wind, temperature. It must reach up into the spring sun and down into the winter earth. The blossoms need the insects and the song of the baby birds. This is not the time to harvest. This is the time to let these ideas come to find other contexts in the underground, in the wilderness. Notice the unecology of the question, what is the point? The meadow never asks such a thing. Life is making life, nothing less. The harvest is a time of golden brown reds and deep orange tones. The harvest is marking the long journey into the squishy death and rot that offers new compost. It is the last moon before the cold comes. Do not race into winter before it's due. Harvest is long in its arrival. Sometimes it comes with an empty basket, leaving its lost leaves and roots to decompose, feeding the possibility of next year. Likewise, let the ideas and stories of today remain in the undergrowth. Let them find new contexts, new contacts, new life. Let the movement of relating follow its own reachings. Let it touch and rename itself as it moves. This is the beginning. This is the middle. Let it form and inform. Do not ask what you will get out of this. This is the making of next year's rain. The point is the meadow of 100 years from now. Ecology is not instant. You cannot run to the shop and buy it. There is no summation, nothing to put in your pocket. Only idea seeds in warmth and moist history. Relax. The possibilities are brewing, stewing. Let them wander and shape in ways you may never have considered.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And if you'd like to join us at 8 o'clock Eastern tomorrow morning, we'll be doing a warm data lab, which mobilizes Nora's theory into practice. But oh yeah, people need people session on the calendar. But I really, yeah, appreciate you helping us to turn this compost and figure out how we will
Me.
eat.
I
Yes.
have a question. Could you please go back to the previous slide? Because I
Mhm.
really like how you manage the next one.
This one? Yeah.
Yeah, because it's really special how you manage the methodology.
Mm.
It's really clear, and I think that it is very important to go with this kind of flow. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful because it's not only like having the educator at the top, but it's actually equal.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
you ask the questions. Yeah,
Yeah,
congratulations.
thank you so much. Yeah, something that guides my teaching is that like the way the information is organized is like as important as the information itself, to allow
You're
for
right.
that connection and accessibility. So thank you for noticing.
You're